This video is additional guidance for how to use the flowchart for the 22-23 Pennsylvania Positive Behavior Support Network recognition process. At the top left corner, this is where our flowchart begins. During school year 21-22, that was last year, did the school or the program complete recognition requirements for participation, Tier 1 initial, Tier 1 sustaining, Tiers 1 and 2, or Tiers 1, 2, and 3. If the program or the school was training, or they had taken a gap year, or they were not part of and did not do all of the things that were needed for recognition last year, then you're going to apply for participation recognition this year. However, even if the program or the school did not apply for recognition, if that school or program submitted their annual data from the year prior, an action plan for last year's school year, a self-assessment survey from last year with 80% participation from staff, and if the school or program completed a fidelity measure, then you can still move forward and use the bottom half of the flowchart to guide you in your recognition application. The bottom of this flowchart is organized by tags. Each one of those tags indicate the prior year's recognition application. You will see participation, Tier 1 initial, Tier 1 sustaining, Tiers 1 and 2, Tiers 1, 2, and 3. If your program or school was part of the recognition application last year, simply go to the tab that you applied for last year and look at the questions that are in the diamond. If the school or the program did complete all 4 expectations but did not apply for recognition, then use the questions in the diamond to determine what your recognition status will be for this year. Please note that there are many more detailed instructions and scenarios that you can generate using the 2 links in the squares at the top right of this flowchart. The link in the purple square will take you to program-wide and give you step-by-step questions to answer in order to determine your level of recognition. In the orange block, there is a link to school-wide. That would be the school age for elementary, middle school, high school, alternate education centers, etc. That scenario generator is here, and you can click there to help you determine the next steps for recognition. Let's start with the participation tab. If the program or the school applied last year for participation, then follow this through from left to right. If the school or the program did all 4 submissions, the annual data, the action plan, the self-assessment survey with 80% participation, and the fidelity measure, but they didn't apply for participation, then you will start with the diamond question. Either way, look at the diamond question for participation. In the spring of 22, in addition to the 4 submissions, did the school score greater than 70% of the benchmarks of quality? If that happened, then yes, you would apply for Tier 1 initial. If the school did not score 70% or greater on the benchmarks of quality, then that school is eligible for participation recognition this year.
In program-wide, if you applied for participation and received participation recognition last year in the spring of 2022, you had also done a BOQ and received a score of 70 or greater, then your program may apply for Tier 1 initial for this year. If you did not, then you are eligible to apply for participation recognition again.
You do not need to go through participation in order to start Tier 1 initial. Your school or program does need to score 70% or greater on the benchmarks of quality. Again, participation is there to provide the recognition for those who are working through the process to fidelity, but you are not required to do participation in order to start Tier 1 initial. You are required to have the benchmarks of quality completed with the school or the program and obtain a score of greater than or equal to 70%. If your school applied for Tier 1 initial last year, in the spring of 2022, did the school score 70% or greater on the tiered fidelity inventory for Tier 1? If that answer is yes, then you are eligible to apply for Tier 1 sustaining, or if you're ready, go on to Tiers 1 and 2. If your school did not score 70% or greater on the tiered fidelity inventory for Tier 1, then your school is eligible to apply for participation recognition.
In program-wide, if your program applied for Tier 1 initial last year and in the spring of 2022 completed the BOQ 2.0 and received a score of 70 or greater, then your program is eligible to either apply for Tier 1 sustaining or, if you're ready, apply for Tiers 1 and 2. If in the spring of 2022 your program did not score 70% or greater on the benchmarks of quality 2.0, then you are eligible to apply for participation recognition.
For Tier 1 sustaining, for schools and school age, in the spring of 2022, did the school score 70% or greater on the TFI Tier 1 scale? If the answer is yes, then the school is eligible to apply for Tier 1 sustaining if you'd like to stay at the Tier 1 level, or if you're ready, move on and apply for Tiers 1 and 2. If the school did not score 70% or greater on the TFI for Tier 1, then the school is eligible to apply for participation recognition.
In program-wide, if your program applied for Tier 1 sustaining last year, and in the spring of 2022, your program completed the benchmarks of quality 2.0 and scored 70% or greater, then your program is eligible to either apply for Tier 1 sustaining again, or if you are ready, you may apply for Tiers 1 and 2. If your program did not score a 70% or greater on the benchmarks of quality 2.0, then your program continues to be eligible to apply for participation recognition.
Now let's take a look at Tiers 1 and 2. If your school applied last year for Tiers 1 and 2, and your school scored 70% or greater on the TFI Tiers 1 and 2 subscales, your school is eligible to apply for Tiers 1 and 2 if you wish to continue, or, if you're ready, apply for Tiers 1, 2, and 3. Now, if your school was able to score 70% or greater on the TFI Tier 1 scale, but not on the Tier 2 scale, then you are still eligible, if you're continuing the work for Tiers 1 and 2, to apply again for Tiers 1 and 2. Or, if the school did not score greater than or equal to 70% on the Tier 2 scale, you can also apply for Tier 1 sustaining and give your school time to build up that advanced tier. Or, the school can also apply for participation recognition.
In program-wide, if you applied for Tiers 1 and 2 last year, and your program completed the benchmarks of quality and the Tier 2 on the TFI and scored a 70% or greater in the spring of 2022, your program is eligible to apply for Tiers 1 and 2, or, if you're ready, Tiers 1, 2, and 3. If your program scored 70% or greater on the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0, but did not score 70% or greater on the TFI Tier 2 scale, then you are still eligible to apply for Tiers 1 and 2, as your program will have time to work towards implementation of Tier 2 supports with fidelity throughout the spring. If your program scored 70% or greater on the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0, but did not score 70% or greater on the TFI Tier 2 scale, then your program is eligible to apply for Tiers 1 and 2, but may rather opt to apply for Tier 1 sustaining or participation recognition. Your program has options.
Now let's go to Tiers 1, 2, and 3. If the school in the spring of 2022 scored 70% or greater on the TFI Tier 1, 2, and 3 subscales, then that school is eligible again to apply for Tiers 1, 2, and 3. However, if the school did not meet the 70% or greater for Tier 3, but did meet it for Tiers 1 and 2, that school can try again for applying for recognition for Tiers 1, 2, and 3. If the school applied for Tiers 1, 2, and 3, but met fidelity at only Tier 1, then that school is eligible to apply for Tiers 1 and 2 to work on the fidelity at Tier 2. If the school did not meet fidelity for Tier 2, that school is also eligible to apply for Tier 1 sustaining while the school builds back fidelity to Tier 2. At any time, the school can apply for participation recognition, but we encourage you to continue to be recognized for all 3 tiers as the school is ready.
In program-wide, if your program applied for Tiers 1, 2, and 3 last year, and you completed in the spring of 2022 the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0 and obtained a score of 70% or greater, and you completed the TFI Tiers 2 and 3, then you are ready to apply for Tiers 1, 2, and 3. If your program scored 70% or greater on the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0, but did not score 70% or greater on the TFI Tier 3 scale, then your program is eligible to apply for Tiers 1, 2, and 3, but may rather opt to apply for Tiers 1 and 2, or Tier 1 sustaining, or participation recognition. Again, your program has options.
And that's it. This is the flowchart. Please remember that we encourage all schools and programs to apply for the highest level they are ready for when it comes to recognition. If, after using the scenario generator for either program-wide or school-wide, you still have additional questions, please click on the link at the top right in the yellow dialog box that says FAQs. We'll be more than happy to answer individual questions. Most of your questions can be answered using the scenario generator, and please know you're not alone. You've got other facilitator friends, you've got your coordinators as well. We're all here to help each other out. The participation recognition requirements for the 2022-2023 school year for school-wide school age are 2 submissions by December 1st, which is the annual data for 21-22 school year, that's last year, and this year's action plan for the 2022-23 school year. By June 30th, you have 2 more submissions. The self-assessment survey, with 80% participation, and also the fidelity measure for the spring of 23. There's no minimum score required, and you can use the team implementation checklist, the benchmarks of quality, or the tiered fidelity inventory, but please recognize that schools that are planning to apply for Tier 1 Initial in the following year must use the benchmarks of quality measure in the spring of 2023.
In program-wide, there are also requirements for the 2022-23 participation recognition. There are 4 pieces of data that are needed to be submitted. There will be 2 pieces of data that will be due by December 1st. Those include the annual data for the 2021-22 school year and also the 2022-23 action plan. By June 30th, you will need to submit the Early Childhood Self-Assessment Survey with a participation of at least 80%, and that can be completed in the spring of 2023. Also, that same spring, complete a fidelity measure. There is no minimum score required on the benchmarks of quality 2.0.
The Tier 1 Initial and Tier 1 Sustaining Recognition requirements for the 22-23 school year are the same. For school-wide, school age, you need 2 submissions by December 1st. Your annual data from last year, which is the 21-22 school year, and your current action plan for this year from 22-23. By June 30th, you have 2 more submissions. The self-assessment survey participation rate of 80% or more in the spring of 2023, and a score of 70% or greater on the tiered fidelity inventory for Tier 1 for the spring of 2023.
For the 2022-23 school year programs, there are 4 pieces of data that are required. 2 are due by December 1st. Those include the annual data for the 21-22 school year and the action plan for the 2022-23 school year. By June 30th, there are 2 more additional pieces of data that are due. That will include the Early Childhood SAS participation with an 80% participation rate, and that can be completed in the spring of 2023. You will also need to submit the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0 with a score of 70% or greater, and that can be completed in the spring of 2023.
For Tiers 1 and 2 recognition requirements, school-wide school age has 4 submissions by December 1st. Provide the annual data for the prior year for the 21-22 school year and an action plan for this year for 2022-23. By June 30th, please complete the TFI Tiers 1 and 2 with a score of equal or greater than 70% in the spring of 2023. And finally, the self-assessment participation with an 80% rate from staff in 2023.
For programs who are ready to apply for Tiers 1 and 2 recognition, there are 4 pieces of data that are required. 2 are due by December 1st. That will include the annual data for the 21-22 school year and the action plan for 2022-23. There are 2 pieces of additional information that is due by June 30th. That includes the benchmarks of quality and the TFI Tier 2 with a score of 70% or greater, and those can be completed in the spring of 2023. The last piece of information is the Early Childhood Self-Assessment Survey with a participation rate of 80% and greater, and that can be completed also in the same spring of 2023.
And finally, for Tiers 1, 2, and 3 recognition requirements for the 2022-2023 school year, school-wide school age needs to have 2 submissions by December 1st, the annual data for the 21-22 school year, which was last year, and the current action plan for this year for the 2022-2023 school year. By June 30th, you need 2 more submissions, the self-assessment survey with a participation rate of 80% of staff in spring of 2023, and the TFI Tiers 1, 2, and 3 with a score that's equal or greater to 70% in the spring of 2023.
For programs who would wish to apply for Tiers 1, 2, and 3 recognition, there are 4 pieces of data that are required. 2 are due by December 1st. Those include the annual data for 21-22 school year and also the action plan of 2022-23. 2 more pieces of information are due by June 30th. Those include the Early Childhood Self-Assessment Survey with a participation rate of at least 80%, and that can be completed in the spring of 2023, and also the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0 and the TFI for Tiers 2 and 3 with scores of 70% or greater. Again, those can be completed in the spring of 2023.